So last night I did a brief talk on the Scorched Earth, which is the new setting that I'm doing on the channel, or new setting that I've been doing for the past couple of years. I'm actually going to delete that video, because I don't think it goes into enough depth of the overworld as it is. And I think that, to be honest with you, things could get confusing if I just leave it like that. So this is the new first part. I'm not going to talk about anything in depth. I'm literally going to talk about the world concepts, what's going on with the Scorched Earth, what it is, who lives in it, and why. Alright, in a very brief overview. And then tomorrow we'll go into more in depth on different things, different concepts that are going on in the world, and then we'll move on into different kingdoms, empires, peoples, languages, magic, things like that. So, I'm going to do this as I would teach a normal... I approach things like this and all of my guides like I'm teaching the Roman Empire. Like you start off with broad themes, you start off with broad pieces of knowledge, and the broad feel of the era, and then you move into the specifics. So that's what we're going to do with this first part, is just do the first broad sweeping strokes of what's going on in the setting and how everything's working out. So this is the Scorched Earth, and it's something that I've been working on for the past 15 years. Each and every time I've done this piece of work, it has almost been like a piece of the sea coming in, as Tolkien used to describe. I said this in my last video too, about each time the waves come in, they go a little bit further, but then they recede all the way. But they go a little bit further each time into perfection, and that's what I've been doing here. And in terms of perfection, I'm not being arrogant saying that. I mean perfect for me, as in perfect to keep me going. I will actually want to finish this. It's a huge undertaking. This guide will end up being about 150,000 words. And there are a couple of important things to note about the Scorched Earth as a setting. Number one, it's a fantasy setting. It's a dark fantasy setting. Alright, so things are quite realistic, or trying to keep realistic and grim. Warfare is not something you want to be doing if you want to stay alive. Sword fighting, again, is not something you want to be doing. You want to stay alive. People die very, very quickly in this setting. And they artificially die quickly in this setting too, which is something that we will get to a bit later on. So, the Scorched Earth is essentially Earth. That's basically what it is. It's just Earth. It's just Earth. It's actually the Earth that we have now. It's the Earth that is... obviously, it's not modern day, but it is Earth. You know, it is Earth. It's Earth in the ancient world. So antiquity and things like that. So antiquity, medieval, things like that. So it all the way back then. And the main difference between Earth in the Scorched Earth and our Earth is that magic has always existed. It exists, and it has always existed in the world. And essentially, the Scorched Earth is a telling of what the world would be like if it was essentially our world, but magic existed and the gods were real. Right? The gods were real people. They walked around, you know, they fought wars with each other. And every single piece of mythology that you know of from your culture, no matter where you are in the world, was real. So if you're from Germany, you know, the dwarves are real, you know, orcs are real, things like that. If you're from China, you know, different spirits that are there in China, they're real. If you're from Japan, the war god Bishamonten is real, and a lot of other things are real. And of course, if you're in Greece and Rome, but definitely Greece, Zeus is real, Ares is real, Artemis is real. They're all real. All the gods were real people. But in this setting, each setting needs an origin war to set the world up. And in this setting, that war was called the Dragomachy, was when the gods were cast down and annihilated, essentially, by the judges. And the judges were their demigods. They're people that the gods gave their blood to rule on Earth for them. And the judges turned against them, and were in doing so cursed, and magic itself was cursed. So magic used to be a beneficial thing in this world. Now it's something that can only destroy. Magic can only destroy in the Scorched Earth. But when I say anywhere in the world, I mean it. So Africa has its own traditions in this world. The North America and South America have their own traditions. But imagine the fantasy elements are turned up to 11. And combine that with the dark fantasy setting. And you have essentially what the Scorched Earth is. So let's think about it from an English point of view. So if you're English, King Arthur was real. You know, George Pendragon was real. George who killed the dragon, yeah, he was real. You know, Boudica is still in the setting. So all the historical figures of the past are still in the setting. Their names may change. You know, Julius Caesar isn't called Julius Caesar in the setting, but he's still around. You know, their names may change because we have the Roman Empire in this, of course, not the Roman Empire. So things are a little bit different, but it's still recognisably Earth. And you'll see that in the maps I'm going to show you a bit later on as well. So, that is essentially the Scorched Earth in a nutshell. And the reason why I made the Scorched Earth is because I wanted to have my cake and eat it. I want everything in the same setting. So, technological advancement, especially in the medieval world, is much quicker in the Scorched Earth because of magic. Magic has pulverized things to the stage that we have steel much earlier. We have feudalism much earlier. So, and we generally ignore the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages don't happen in this setting. So even when the Roman Empire, well, we'll substitute for the Roman Empire, even when it loses much of its land and they become independent, they go from being Roman or Riemann to being essentially feudal kingdoms, medieval feudal kingdoms overnight. And the Roman Empire is still very much around, so we have the best of both worlds. You know, we have the cool legions of Rome, and we have the really cool knights and warriors and serfs and you know, the medieval feudalism of Europe going on as well. Again, this is a very dark setting. There is disease. Humans in this setting do not live above 50, and they generally don't get to 40. And that is artificial as well. There is a magical genophage called the Reaper Plague, which is a disease, a magical disease that infects all humans, and it ensures that they die before 40. It's a cancer essentially that has them die very, very painfully. And what that has done, and that has driven human beings to be adventurers. It's driven them to be risk takers, and in doing so, they've created the largest kingdoms and empires in the world. So that's something to look forward to moving on. So that is generally the gist of the Scorched Earth going forward. That's generally what's going on. You know, we have different concepts, you know, that we'll be going over in the coming weeks. But the Scorched Earth is generally a fantasy setting set in Earth, what melds ancient and medieval kingdoms, gods, warfare, things like that, into one big setting. And it does that the world over as well. So, in our setting, for instance, there is still a colonization of America by Europeans, but it happens much, much, much earlier. So, medieval Europeans land in America, and they start fighting with natives who are in America and things like that. But one of the main differences with America in this setting is that the natives are immune to disease. That's one of their main advantages, is that they don't suffer from disease, which means they have a lot of numbers, and so they fight back. They have their own empires in America still. So when we get to America, that's what we're going to be talking about. But the 150,000 words of the guide is essentially just on Europe and a bit of Asia as well. So it's basically just on Europe. There are different races in the Scorched Earth, so it's not just humans. Okay, so there are elves in 2 different forms. All right, there are the Achaeans or the Achaeans, who are essentially Spartans. These are essentially Spartan elves. They stand around 6'5" to 7 feet. They're heavily muscled. They are alpha predators. They are able to absorb the memories and skills of defeated opponents by eating their flesh. These are fierce. These are perfect warriors, essentially. They are the perfect specimens. They don't have a big empire because there aren't very many of them, but they do rule Greece. So Greece in this world is essentially ruled by Spartan elves who speak in Greek. You know, they speak in it's called Laconic, and they speak in their own language, and they are subservient, but I use that term loosely, to the Roman Empire. And generally they are mercenaries. They are huge, big guys with big spears and swords, essentially. And the other elves are just called elves, and they live in mainly Ireland and Scotland. So in modern-day Ireland, modern-day Scotland, that's where they live. And these are the stereotypical elves that are pretty much like Dragon Age elves. They're small in stature, smaller than humans, and same size as dwarves, essentially. But not as stocky, they're very lithe, they're very, light, and they are generally an oppressed race. They're very tribal, they're very clan-like, but they are very, very big and into druidism and things like that. You do have dwarves, but in this setting they're called dweor, and the dweor is basically an ancient Brittonic name for people of the mountains. That's what it means. So dwarves aren't small. Dwarves are a little bit shorter than humans, but not much, and they are far, far, far stronger. But they are the elder race, and they are the oldest race in the world, and they breed very, very slowly. They live in the mountains, and they're amazing at forging and crafting and things like that. And they only generally live in Scandinavia, Britain, and Germany, Northern Europe. That's the only place where the dweor are in this world. And they don't move, they don't go anywhere. They're very much monastic smiths. For instance, the dwarves of Eredrin, which is the main city in Britain, which is near Scotland, and in the mountains near Scotland, they make the badge of office for the King of Albion. There've only ever been 2 kings of Albion in history, because Albion is a divided land these days. Now the Roman Empire doesn't rule it. And the badge of office of those 2 kings was made by the dweor. So they made these ceremonial blades that the kings would have as their badge of office. And to become King of Albion, you need to be blessed by the dweor, the elder race. And so that's their part in this setting. We have the Asunda, who are essentially a mix of Mongolians, Cumans, Turks, Chinese, and Russians. They're all blended in together, and they essentially look like Klingons. They have ridges in their skulls, in their foreheads, and these are essentially some of the greatest warriors in the world. They're all mounted warriors. They're cavalrymen, and they have one of the biggest empires in the world at this time as well. And yes, they essentially run the Asunder Empire in the east. They don't follow any gods, and they are generally not to be messed with. And that is everyone. Oh, we also have the orcs as well, and orcs are mainly in Africa, and that's only because of the climate there as well. The orcs live in deserts, and the biggest deserts near Europe are the Gobi Desert, which is in Asia, which is where orcs are as well, and also in Africa, where orcs are as well. So that's where they generally are, and they're generally a tribalistic culture who live there, and they trade with the people there as well. And yeah, that's their culture. They are in Africa. They run something called the Locust Empire, which we will get to in time. And those are the fantasy races that are in this setting, apart from humans. And humans come in all different shapes and sizes, just like they do in the real world. We have North Europeans, we have Mediterranean skin people, we have black people, we have Native Americans, we have Chinese people, Asian people, Japanese people, all sorts. The world is made up of all sorts, all across the world. So it is a huge undertaking. I know that very much so. It's a huge undertaking because we are literally writing the history of the world. Like, literally of the world. I'm currently writing Europe at the moment. I'm about 100,000 words in. I'm very, very proud of it, and I'll be reading from it in the coming weeks as well. And in the coming weeks, you're basically going to be told and taught what happens, how the gods are murdered. Alright, so the gods did rule. The gods are murdered. And with the murder of the gods, magic becomes a destructive force and is corrupted, and it corrupts all of humanity as well, so that they are now inflicted with the Reaper Plague. Not just that, though. The destruction of the gods basically forms things like ether storms, and ether storms are massive conflagrations of magical energy that can cover entire continents at times for about 6 months of the year, because the year in this world is a lot longer, because the Earth has been knocked out of its axis a little bit. So the actual the tempest months are the months in which ether storms are at their worst, and they seep into the civilized world and they batter everything into submission, essentially. And so a lot of people actually live in things called storm-glaived cities. And storm-glaived cities are essentially cities that have a piece of technology in them that the gods used to use to keep their cities safe, which protects you from ether storms. So humans and everyone in the world is generally very migratory in nature. They go from their hovels out there in the in the countryside, and they migrate for 6 months of the year to a city, their nearest Stormglaive city. So the Stormglaive cities are huge in this setting. And on the flip side of that, you know, being outside of the Stormglaive doesn't guarantee you're going to die in the Tempest month. It just makes your existence very, very dangerous. Because Tempest, the ether storms can come down at any point and sear the flesh from your bones, essentially. That's all I want to go into on the ether storms and things like that, and magic, because it gets very, very, very in-depth as we're going on, and we're going to do a session on each of these just to make sure that you know exactly what I'm talking about. Eventually, I would love to turn this into a tabletop role-playing game. I would love to turn it into something that you guys can play along with. I'd love you guys to get involved. And if you see a culture here that I have not touched on, you know, if you see a culture that I just have not touched on, I have not done, then do it. Do it yourself. Read what I've put so you know the general feeling of the world. Do a bit of research and do it yourself. There's no problem. I've got no problem with that if I don't touch it. If you're from Africa, or you're interested in African nations, or if you're from South America, if you're from places like Hungary or Poland or anywhere like that I haven't touched, you know, there are some kingdoms in Europe that I don't talk about. You know, I don't even give names to. There are some places in Europe that I don't talk about. I mainly do Western Europe, things like that. So if that's something that you'd be interested in, then get involved. You know, ask me what would work and what wouldn't. This is an open resource, essentially. Essentially, I will trademark it in the end, obviously, and I want to make money from it eventually. But essentially, you know, if you want to get involved, I've got no problem with that either, at all. So next time we'll be covering the Murder of the Gods and the Dragomachy, and which is basically the foundation story, the foundation war of this setting as we move forwards. So thanks very, very, very much for watching. I'm going to go and delete that other video now. But this is the... If you're looking at the maps of the world, this is kind of what they look like. So we've got... This is one of modern day, quote-unquote modern day, in terms of the setting, Britain. So you can see how it looks similar, but it does look smashed apart. It looks warped, you know. And there's another map that we've done here, which is very, very similar. So this is, you know, again, it's all smashed apart. It's all warped. It's all, you know, changed essentially. And the different kingdoms there. So you have the Dragon Princes, which is Wales. You have Kingdom of Camelot, which is, you know, the eastern part of England. You have Dumnonia there as well, Cornish, things like that. And you have North here, so you have Kurnow here, which is a breakaway part of Scotland. And you have Scotland here, which has been taken over mainly by the Falkir. And the Falkir are mainly the Norse people of the world as well. And the Fainlaw is also their little kingdom there as well. So that is the setting. And that's the kind of geography you're looking at when you're looking at England and things like that. And you're looking at the world. I love looking at the Earth itself and saying, look at this place, this is awesome. I would love to put this in my book somewhere, so I'll rename it and I'll call this desert the Big Sandy Desert in my setting. Well, I don't need to do that anymore, because if I go to the Gobi Desert in real life, that's actually in my setting. If I go to the Sahara Desert in real life, that's actually in the Scorched Earth. That's where all of these orcish kingdoms are. If I go to America, and I go to Southwest America, where it's quite desert, you know, it's quite rugged, then I'm like, yeah, that's great. You know, that there are like tribes of Native Americans running around here, and they have their own empires down here, and their own cultures and things like that. If I go to the northeast of America and I see all these vast fields and mountains and rivers and things like that, like, yeah, this is cool. This is where the European nations land, and this is where they have their kingdoms in this new place. It's going to be great. It's going to be amazing, and I can't wait to tell you all about it. So in the next session, I will be talking about the Dragomachy, which is the foundation myth of the entire setting, and the Murder of the Gods. So we did have a long time when the gods were ruling the Scorched Earth. And next time we're going to be talking about when all that comes to an end and the bones of our setting start getting put into motion. So, I'll see you then. Thanks so much for watching. I'll speak to you next time.